What's going on, folks? Ted from Nerd Immersion here, and happy Dungeon Master's Guide early release day. If you have a Master Tier subscription on D&D Beyond and pre-ordered the Dungeon Master's Guide, you should have access to it now. So if you go ahead and are reading through it and you find something interesting you think I should make a video on, or something I haven't covered yet, let me know in the comments, and I'll make sure to make a video on it. And also, I'm talking today, though, back in the 2024 Player's Handbook about hazards, and I'll explain why here in just a sec. Because Scion of Elemental Evil released, which is a brand new 4th level adventure that released alongside the Dungeon Master's Guide, and I was doing a video comparing rather the monster stat blocks. There are a couple of new ones and several that were updated. So I was taking the 2014 versions and the new 2024 versions and comparing the two to see what changed and what was improved. That video is out now. You can go check it out if you want. But I recognized when I was talking about the fire elemental from things I saw in the comments that I referenced the burning hazard. And I realized that several people didn't seem to know what that was. Now, hazards are not new in the terms of Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. All of these things existed in one form or another, but they weren't quantified as hazards. They are now. There are 5 of them. We're going to discuss what they are and how they interact, and even some of the updates from what we saw back in 2014 to how they apply now. So, before we dive into that, though, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please consider doing so. It is literally a single click for you, and it does a whole bunch for me. So, here we are in the 2024 Player's Handbook. You can see here a hazard is an environmental danger, and it lists off the 5 different types: burning, dehydration, falling, malnutrition, and suffocation. First up here, we have burning. Again, this is something you might have seen, but it wasn't called this before. Basically, a burning creature or object takes a d4 fire damage at the start of each of its turns. As an action, you can extinguish the fire by giving yourself the prone condition and rolling on the ground. So stop, drop, and roll. And the fire also goes out if it's doused, submerged, or suffocated. Now, probably the most common example of this would be something like Alchemist's Fire, right? When you hit somebody with a bottle of Alchemist Fire, they catch on fire and they take fire damage at the start of their turn. I believe Alchemist Fire is a d4 fire damage every turn. And rather than having to say quantifiably specific things for each thing, each ability that causes you to catch fire, right? So Alchemist Fire is a D4. The old Fire Elemental was a D10. To kind of condense that down, make things a little bit more streamlined, they now just say the creature starts burning, or it inflicts the burning hazard, or what have you. So that's what that is. So some instances, things may have gotten less overall persistent damage by being docked down to a D4, but overall, it's just a little bit easier to understand if we just say, okay, that creature is now burning. What does that mean? Here's what it means: d4 damage at the start of each of its turns until the fire is put out in one means or another. Next up here is dehydration. This is something I don't really see probably getting used too often unless you're running a very crunchy hex crawl survivalist adventure, which if that's the case, then yeah, this might be a huge deal for you. So it says, based on the amount listed in the table, creature needs amount of water per day. And if they drink less than half of the water they need for a day, they gain a level of exhaustion at the day's end. And the only way this exhaustion can be cured is by drinking the full amount of water required for that day. I imagine magic still removes exhaustion, like Greater Restoration. But I would also say that what they're trying to get at is, like, even if you're dehydrated, sleeping won't make it better. You're not going to just automatically feel better in the morning. You need to drink the water. The important thing here is for small and medium creatures, it's the same amount. So it's 1 gallon of water per day. And if you drink less than half a gallon of water per day, then you will start being dehydrated. Again, if you're playing a desert campaign or an open sea campaign or something where the amount of fresh water you have access to is integral to the gameplay, then I understand this rule being here. Otherwise, I'm going to say probably most people aren't going to utilize this in their games, but maybe I'm wrong. Let me know in the comments. Is this something you're like super excited about that they have specific rules for it? Or is this something, you're probably never going to really look at? The only other thing I think could be interesting is if there was like a spell or an ability potentially, like some sort of desiccation thing where you're literally sucking the water out of something that could possibly inflict dehydration on someone. It's essentially just a more roundabout way to give somebody a level of exhaustion. So the only difference is, again, a level of exhaustion potentially granted by a spell is either going to go away when the spell ends, or it could just be healed with a long rest. Whereas if it's specifically due to dehydration, it will persist until they're able to drink that requisite amount of water. That could be interesting. I know there were some spells in older editions that used to, like, dehydration was handled differently then, but like 2 stages of dehydration when you get hit with like a desiccation sap or blast or whatever. But I don't know. Let me know. Next up is another pretty common one here in falling damage. Nothing's really changed here. You take a d6 bludgeoning damage. It is now quantified as bludgeoning damage, which is an important note for people that have resistance to bludgeoning damage. You take a d6 bludgeoning damage at the end of a fall for every 10 feet you fall to a maximum of 20 d6. When you land, you have the prone condition unless you have means to avoid it. But they did add this nice little extra bit that if you fall into water or another liquid or something that can help, reduce the fall damage, you can use your reaction to make either a DC 15 strength athletics check or a DC 15 acrobatics check, dexterity acrobatics check, to try to either land head or feet first in that liquid or whatever the surface is. The resulting damage will be halved. So you're not going to take 0 damage for falling into water, but if you're able to orient yourself so that you're not kind of splayed out and belly flopping or whatever, you're going to take half damage if you can make that associated check. This is a nice little, again, immersion thing to kind of give you, pun intended, I guess, to give you, a little more agency in trying to reduce that damage overall, which I do like. Another one, excuse me, that I think probably won't get used that often here is malnutrition. Falls into the same kind of boat as dehydration. You need to have a certain amount of food. There's a table below, but there's some wonkiness to it, right? So a creature that eats but consumes less than half of the required food for a day must succeed on a DC 10 Constitution saving throw or gain 1 level of exhaustion at the day's end. A creature that eats nothing for 5 days automatically gains 1 level of exhaustion at the end of the 5th day, as well as an additional level at the end of each subsequent day. And again, similar to water, you have to eat an amount of food to be able to not get that exhaustion. And for small or medium creatures, it's a singular pound of food. Now, rules as written, I'm sure this isn't the intention, but basically what it says is if I eat but consume less than half of a pound, then I need to make a DC 10 Constitution saving throw or gain a level of exhaustion at the end of the day. As that's written, if I just don't eat anything, I don't have to worry about exhaustion at the end of the day. I only have to worry about exhaustion for if I've eaten nothing for 5 days. So again, as that's written, it seems like it's better to not eat at all than to eat some if you can't eat the amount more than half a pound. Because again, you'd be better off saving up your food scraps, going 4 days without eating, than eating a half a pound of food so that you're not dealing with the exhaustion, and then it resets your clock. You can go another 4 days without eating. Again, as that's written, I'm sure that's not the intention, but it does say that you only have to make that save if you eat but consume less than the required amount. Whereas, again, not eating anything will give you exhaustion in 5 days. Or for 5 days, you'll automatically get one at the end of the 5th day, no less. So you could eat that little bit of a half pound of food on the 5th day. Again, maybe this is super important for campaigns where you are, again, doing crunchy hex crawl survivalist stuff. But there are so many ways to get around this. Rations aren't super expensive. The opportunity of possibly hunting something that you find. The good berry spell can fill remove basically malnutrition from 10 creatures, create food and water. There are ways to get around not having to worry about rations, or food, but either way. And lastly, here we have Suffocation, which now is you can hold your breath for a number of minutes equal to 1 plus your Constitution modifier to a minimum of 30 seconds. Again, that's if you have a negative modifier, before suffocation begins. Now it is when a creature runs out of breath, it starts choking, or is choking. It gains a level of exhaustion at the end of each of its turns. When a creature can breathe again, it removes all levels of exhaustion it gained from suffocating. Reminder that if you hit 6 levels of exhaustion, you die flat outright. Now, this is a little bit different than classic 2014 suffocation. It still had that concept of you can hold your breath for a number of minutes equal to 1 plus your Constitution modifier to a minimum of 30 seconds. Then again, it used to say here, though, when a creature runs out of breath or is choking, it can survive for a number of rounds equal to its Constitution modifier, minimum of 1 round. At the start of its next turn, it drops to 0 hit points and is dying and can't regain its hit points or be stabilized until it can breathe again. So basically, what it was previously is you'd run out of breath. You couldn't hold your breath any longer. And then if your constitution modifier was a 3, you could survive for 3 whole rounds before you started, then drop to 0 hit points and are considered dying. Again, it gives the example here, right? A creature with a constitution of 14 can hold its breath for 3 minutes. It's 1 plus the con mod. If it starts suffocating, it has 2 rounds to reach air before it drops to 0 hit points. Now, you don't have rounds of safety, really. You have you gain a level of exhaustion at the end of each of your turns, and then until you die, basically. So instead of having a constitution be this, you have basically 6 rounds. But remember that new versions of exhaustion cuts everything down for you. That's a -2 to attack rolls, ability checks, saving throws, and a -5 to your you can't concentrate on spells, I believe. I think that's part of it. And you get a -5 to your movement speed for each level of exhaustion. Sorry, there was nothing about concentration, but yes, -2 to all d20 rolls, -5 to your movement speed for each level of exhaustion, and that persists. So you might technically get more rounds alive in that you would get the freebie rounds equal to your constitution modifier, but then you'd start dying immediately after that. So again, in that example where you had a 14 constitution, you got 2 freebie rounds there where you're scrambling trying to get air, and if you don't do it, then you immediately drop to 0 hit points and start dying. Whereas with this, you can operate up to the full 6 rounds, but at the end of those 6 rounds, you are dead. And you no saving throw. You are just dead. But you're also everything's being lessened here. Your movement speed's being cut each time, which means the potential for you to be able to move to get where you need to go is going to be that much harder. I also feel like for whatever reason, this version of Suffocation with the stacking levels of exhaustion feels more dangerous, more like there's more tension there. This gives me I actually just got goosebumps thinking about it. This version of Suffocation from 2014, I feel like I've got, if I've got a good constitution score, I'm going to do okay. And I don't feel like as hectic and as it is as dangerous. When I get to the point where I'm getting a level of exhaustion around, this is giving me PTSD flashbacks of various Sonic the Hedgehog levels with the music escalating and trying to catch the bubble of air so you don't drown. This feels like that more so than the other version for whatever reason for me. Maybe that's just me. Let me know in the comments if you feel that I think this is more dangerous because, again, you got the free rounds and then you start going to 0 hit points and start dying. This is, you've got 6 rounds to figure it out or you are dead, period. And again, you're losing movement each turn, making it harder to get away. Or to get to air. But anyway, folks, that is my quick coverage of the 5 hazards that exist here in D&D 5e 2024. Let me know your thoughts and opinions on this. I do think this was a missed opportunity between hazards and conditions to not have like a bleeding one where you take like piercing damage at the start of each turn because you're bleeding out. It doesn't really feel like that falls under environmental conditions. I feel like it could have been a condition that you could afflict to somebody. I also think I really like that because the amount of interaction that spells and other things could have with the ability to inflict bleeding could be cool, but I think the concept of maybe that's why burning was switched to a hazard because none of the conditions really come with a persistent damage you take every turn, whereas burning is kind of unique. So maybe that's why they didn't do like a bleeding because, we had bleeding and stuff like that, different wounds you could inflict in Baldur's Gate, and I thought that worked pretty well, but who knows? Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments down below. I'll see you all next time.